After going through this video, you will be able to create a class component, add a state to the class component. In the previous topic, we learned that props are uneditable. But what if we want information which changes over time, maybe upon some user interaction like click or hover? How can we do that? Let us look at this example to understand this better. Here we have 4 buttons: red, yellow, blue and green. Upon clicking on any of these buttons, the color of the corresponding heading changes. This color change is some information change that is happening on user interaction. If you are wondering how, we are maintaining a color variable which stores the initial color of the heading as black, and on clicking the button we are changing the color accordingly. We then use this color variable as the class name of the heading text to change the CSS accordingly. We have already written the CSS for each of these class names, so as we change the class name, the change in the color will automatically be taken care of. Since the color variable changes over time, we cannot have it as props are uneditable. So here comes the need of states. States are information associated with a component that allow us to create components that are dynamic and interactive. So here we will have to maintain a state for the box component that will denote the heading color. On each button click, this information will be changed and affect the heading color accordingly. Let us see how it works. Now, there are 2 ways to create a component. The first one is the functional component, which we have been doing till now. And the second way is the class component, which we will study in a few moments. If we talk about the functional components, they are stateless, which means they cannot handle states. A stateless functional component can simply be seen as a function that takes arguments in the form of props and returns HTML elements in the form of JSX that will be rendered into UI. And if we talk about class components, states are only available to class components. It means that if we want to include states in a component, then we must use the class component. Since our box component is a functional component, let us first see how we can change it into a class component in order to include states to it. Here we have our old box component code. To make it a class component, we do away with the function and change it to class. Now, the class must extend react.component. In JavaScript, we use extend to create subclasses. Here, we are extending react.component in order to inherit the properties and methods of react.component class so that we can use them in our box component. Now, inside the class, we must define the render method inside a class component. The render method will contain the return statement as it is, so we don't need to make any changes to it. The only change that we now need to make is the way we use the props. In the class component, props are not accessed through arguments as they are in functional components. Here, props is a property of the class component itself that is automatically assigned to an object containing a list of all the props passed to the component. Hence, in the class component, we refer to the props with this.props instead of simply props. This class component will now work the same as our previously written functional components. Next, there is no change in the way we use or include the component, so we don't need to make any change here. The advantage of writing a component as a class component is that whenever in future we need to add a state, we can simply add it without having to make any change in the way we have defined our component. So, now that we have successfully changed the functional component to a class component, let us now see how we can add the buttons which we saw earlier in the video that will change the color of the headings text. So in our class component, just below the P element, we will add the buttons like this. To add a button, we use a button HTML opening and closing tags. And inside this tag, we label the button the way we want. Now that we have added the buttons, let us add the state to our class component. Like props, state is also a property to the component and is an object. But unlike props, we need to explicitly assign it. Whatever state we want to add, it goes as a property inside the state property object. Let's add a color state that will go as a class to the heading text. Let's give it a default value of black. Now, the next part is to make the state change upon clicking the buttons, which we will cover in the next video. Stay tuned.